Friday, July 19th, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This afternoon, I thought I would do an update on the petrodollar, on the recent news about the new payment system that the EU has launched with Iran called INSTEX, and how the Russians are looking to cooperate with this payment system. And I also want to talk about how the regime of sanctions that the US has been implementing, not only against Iran, but a lot of other countries in the last few years, is actually a negative for the dollar going forward. And it will push the world even more into finding alternatives to the dollar. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Before I go more into detail on this subject, just like to say I received my Time to Retire the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street t-shirt today. It's my new campaign to shut down the Bank of England, just like end the Fed. So I've used the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street. I bought the rights to this image at alamy.com. They have loads of images. I had to buy the rights to make the t-shirts. I have the rights for a year. In the back of the shirt, there's a comment by William Patterson, who was the founder of the Bank of England in 1694. And he said that the bank hath the benefit of interest paid on all monies that it creates out of thin air. So that's how fraudulent and how can I say unfair a system it is, because you get bankers making an income on something that doesn't exist, and people in the real world, in the real economy, making an income on real things. They can't just create farms out of thin air or create services out of thin air, but the bankers can. So yeah, the t-shirt is on teespring.com in the Maneco 64 store there. There's also mugs. Time to Retire the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street mugs. And I also like to say before I go on that with precious metals prices moving higher, that I have a promo code with Gold Investments, and that promo code is Maneco64. Gold Investments, they've been a bullion dealer in the city of London since 1981. It's a family-run business, and you get a 0.5% discount if you buy your physical gold and silver from them. So I'm holding on to my 1 ounce Britannias. I've also got here one of my 1 ounce Buffaloes, one of my favorite coins. It's an American bullion coin. It's 24 karat. You need to be careful when you handle it, of course. But yeah, I'm holding on to my physical gold. I think it's going to get harder and harder to come by precious metals as the price of fiat money continues to collapse against precious metals. That's, I think, the way you should look at it. Not the price of gold or silver going up, but the paper money, going down or sinking. I've been covering the petrodollar and the challenge to the petrodollar for quite a few years. Last year was an important year for, I would say, the continued loss of influence of the dollar and the continued search for alternatives by powers like China and Russia to the petrodollar. I covered last year and prior to the beginning of last year the big development in China at the International Energy Exchange, the launch last March 2018, of a oil-based yuan futures contract that is deliverable. That was a big deal. That will allow countries that sell oil to China to be able to pay in yuan. They will also be able to take those yuans and convert them to gold. There is a Shanghai Gold Exchange as well, a physical exchange there. So at the time, What I said is that this is just the beginning. It's a process that will take a few years. It's not going to happen overnight. The dollar is not going to collapse overnight. I've mentioned the fact that prior to the dollar being the reserve currency, sterling was the reserve currency, and sterling hasn't disappeared, but its value certainly has gone down massively. Back just before World War II, £1 was about $4.80, and now we're at like 123, 124. And sterling is still a reserve currency, not the major reserve currency, but it's probably held 5% of world central bank reserves is held in sterling. So it's still important. And I don't think the dollar is going to disappear overnight, but it's going to become less and less significant and important in relative terms. And I think the regime of sanctions that the US administration has been imposing on countries like Iran, Venezuela, and other countries around the world, countries that the US administration or US foreign policy leaders are not happy with. They punish them with, they're using the US dollar or the Federal Reserve notes as a weapon, while countries around the world, they want to have a reserve currency that is more neutral, that is apolitical, that is used for trade and commerce amongst countries and cooperation. And I think even recently, I think yesterday or the day before, Secretary of the Treasury, Mnuchin, even said that if people want to be in the dollar system, they better toe the line. So basically, you do as the US says, or you can't use the dollar. And I think that's it's not gonna happen overnight. And why not? Why don't I think it's gonna happen overnight? Well, because a lot of companies in the EU, in the UK, a lot of big corporations around the world, they still depend a lot on selling to the United States. They depend on the dollar still. So it's not gonna happen overnight. But the fact that people are moving to find ways to circumvent the dollar is very significant, and I think it's only gonna get, how can I say, bigger, this move. And recently we've had INSTEX, which is an alternative to SWIFT, which is the way that the dollar system, that's how banks deal with each other. They wire money through SWIFT in the dollar system. And Iran has been cut out of the system after President Trump got out of the Iran deal last year. Europe has remained, and this was an alternative to SWIFT, and it's been done with the EU and Iran. As I said earlier, European multinationals that do a lot of business in the US, they're going to be a little bit coy about using INSTEX, I think. But recently, I think it was 2 days ago or yesterday, the Russians said that they're going to start working with INSTEX, with the EU and Iran. I think it was an interview given by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or the equivalent of Secretary of State of Russia, Lavrov. He gave an interview to the FT and said that they want to start cooperating with the EU. And the EU has said that they're open to other countries, non-EU countries and not Iran, also using INSTEX. So I think that's a big shot across the bow of the US. And I don't think the US is going to back down. They're going to keep punishing other countries that don't toe the line with their political or geopolitical objectives. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're going to continue to see countries like Russia, China, Iran, even the EU, trying to find alternatives to dealing with each other, be it through the Chinese yuan, be it through the euro. And I think that's going to get very important as well. And that's why I think a lot of countries have been buying so much precious metals. We've seen Poland, Hungary, China. They're publicizing again all the gold they buy every month. Prior to them publishing these figures again, late last year they hadn't published anything for 3 years. We know the Russians are accumulating a lot of precious metals. The Indians always accumulate precious metals, and I think other countries are going to keep accumulating precious metals because they want a system that is apolitical, a system that is based on a measure of value that has been stable for thousands of years, and that's not the Federal Reserve note. So that's why I think the Federal Reserve note is going to continue to lose value versus precious metals, versus gold and silver. And I think other currencies as well are going to keep losing value versus precious metals as well, but not as much as the Federal Reserve note. I don't think the United States wants to go the way of a gold standard or a system that includes gold, because it's going to take a lot of political power away from them, because gold is neutral. Gold is not political. You can't print gold out of thin air. You have to earn it. It's about countries wanting to cooperate and trade with each other, and being held ransom by the United States, never knowing if you're going to be able to operate worldwide with other countries because you're dependent on the United States dollar or the Federal Reserve note, is going to put a lot of incentive, and has already been putting a lot of incentive behind all these countries. Yes, the yuan oil contract was very important last year. Yes, INSTEX recently is very important. That doesn't mean to say the dollar is going to go away overnight, but more and more the importance of the dollar is going to decrease. I also think that more and more countries are going to use other currencies to pay for projects, and that's what Jim Sinclair talked about the other day on the Greg Hunter interview. People are going to try to get away from the dollar as much as possible to build infrastructure in emerging market countries like railroads or roads or power plants. They're going to try to use maybe their own currencies, the yuan, the euro, or even gold. So I think there will be a lot less demand for dollars. So what about for Americans? What will that mean for Americans? I think a good way to see what it's going to mean for Americans is to look at where I am in the UK or Great Britain. 100 years ago, Britain still had its empire, still a very wealthy country, and it still is today. But if you look at the currency, what it's done in the last 100 years, it's gone from almost $5 to almost $1. Inflation has been quite high in the UK, especially since World War II. The UK has lost a lot of influence, even though it still has influence, but it's lost a lot of its manufacturing, and the middle class has kind of shrunk a lot. So that's what is going to happen to the United States. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. The dollar is going to disappear. So how do you protect yourself as an American, or even someone outside the US who holds dollars? Because a lot of people in emerging market countries hold dollars. Well, I think you need to think twice about holding too many Federal Reserve notes and start accumulating precious metals, at least for your monetary savings. This is my opinion, and it's not advice. And it's also different from investment, what you want to invest in terms of stock market and companies or real estate. That's up to you. I would say, though, trying to have tangible hard assets is the way forward, not only for Americans though, but for everyone around the world. Even though we're moving away from the dollar gradually, the fiat currencies that we have, they're all derivative of the dollar. So those are going to go down in value. They're all going to sink, as I've said before. The US dollar, or the Federal Reserve note, if you want to call it, will still be around. It will still be one of the major currencies out there, but there's going to be a lot less demand for it. When there's less demand for something, the value of that thing goes down. So if the the value of the dollar goes down relative to other currencies and relative to tangible assets, you get a rise in cost of living. So that's why it's important, in my opinion, to have physical gold and silver or tangible assets, and maybe also diversify your source of income if you can in the US. Maybe earn foreign currencies, just like people in emerging markets have done, just like people in the UK do now. The Americans probably never think about earning foreign currency, but that's something to think about. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, share it far and wide if you think others would like this kind of content. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Steemit, and on DTube. I wish you all a great rest of the day. Take care. Bye.